Hello everybody, welcome to What Culture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, Xbox have lost the console war. Literally their words.
Is that right?
As of 2023 right now, coming from various write-ups from the court hearing between Microsoft, Activision Blizzard, and the Federal Trade Commission, because Microsoft are trying to get their Blizzard-Activision deal over the finish line. And so their whole approach to this is, we're just tiny little Microsoft. We've just got a couple of little consoles, and we don't mean anything to anyone. We just want a little deal to get over the finish line. So their whole approach to getting this thing over is just to try and convince the world that they're not Microsoft, that they're not Xbox, that they never had any success with the Xbox across the last 20 years, which, as we'll get to, I think at least, is BS, but we'll get there. So like I said, this is literally their quote. Xbox has lost the console wars, saying that Xbox's rivals are positioned to continue to dominate. This is how they're describing the last 20 years of Xbox as well. They refer to the current market, which I'll get back to, but they say that the last 2 decades of Xbox, they've never been able to gain a foothold. They've always been in third place behind Sony and Nintendo, just completely skirting over all the 360 stuff. I'll get to that.
Yes.
But thoughts right now, and then I'll get into some more stuff.
Thoughts right now is that both sides of this argument, that being Microsoft and Sony, are trying to position themselves as these, like, inept companies that can't win or do anything. Like, you know, we're going to give Microsoft a lot of crap for this comment today, no doubt, but on the Sony side, you know, they had the whole thing of, we couldn't possibly make a Call of Duty competitor, we just don't have the expertise, we don't have the likes of Bungie that we've just acquired to make us a really interesting shooter. I think there's like a defeatist approach to trying to get this deal either stopped or over the line that I don't buy. Both sides are saying like a lot of mad stuff seemingly every week, and it's like technically true. I do think that, you know, when they have lost the console wars, in my opinion, so far, but to the extent in which they're trying to imply, I don't think so necessarily.
No, same. So like I said, their whole comment on the current state of everything is that Xbox's rivals are positioned to continue to dominate, but I'll get back to that in a sec. I do want to address the Xbox 360 stuff, because I feel like a lot of us, if you grew up with Xbox, maybe had the original systems like we did, and then straight into the 360, I think a lot of people came on board with the 360, and that system is iconic. A lot of people remember that period, Gears of War, Fable, whatever. More, I mean, obviously Fable was on the original Xbox, but there was more of them on the 360. Towards the end of the 2000s, it was when they started falling apart. But if we talk about specifics, the 360 did dominate the PlayStation 3 in terms of a direct comparison across 2006 and 2007 and 2008, with millions more units being sold. Now, the PlayStation 2 was outselling the PlayStation 3. Yeah. That's how badly the PS3 was received. So Microsoft can still make a claim about general market share, and that we did dominate over time, but it's just worth saying that Xbox has had considerable success that I would say can't be overlooked if we're talking about this inevitability of the future and them forever being on the back foot and everything else. Total console sales as of September 2021 did put the PlayStation 3 at 87.4 million units shipped versus the 360's 85.5, so 2 million above. Yeah. But we're still talking about a few years in the middle there where they were demonstrably ahead. It wasn't until the Xbox 360 started going all in on Kinect and everything and stopped doing didn't do that many exclusives anymore that it allowed PlayStation to catch up, at least from my perspective.
Here is where I'm going to play devil's advocate, because I do think that, you know, while the Xbox 360 is an iconic machine, it had loads of success, like you mentioned, loads of great new franchises, a lot of beloved IP. Yes. Despite all of that, despite how strong it was, it still ultimately lost. It still got beat by the PS3 in terms of raw sales, and in my head, if I was looking at that, that is Microsoft's best run, right? Yes. And it's Sony's worst run. And if Microsoft firing on all cylinders can't beat, again, in quotations, beat Sony, shooting themselves in their feet, cutting their feet off and eating their own feet for like 5 years, I kind of do agree with them that they'll never be able to.
But they were ahead for so long, though.
They were, but like I think it's, I don't know, man. It's like a testament to the fact that they lost that. That to me is the most important part of that, because they were ahead, but they couldn't maintain it. And my argument is that if they couldn't maintain it in that era, they almost never will, because Sony managed to bounce back. And it's not to say that Xbox can't be successful. It is successful right now, and I want it to succeed. It's just that I do kind of agree with them that unless like things radically changed and Sony completely lost the plot, I don't see them ever getting the market share back to the extent that they would win. I think it's ridiculous to say that that doesn't mean they're ever going to be successful, because that's absolutely not true. But in terms of, this kind of reductive console war discourse and winning and losing. I think, yeah, like if they didn't win then, they might never be able to.
My whole thing is it's all about the games. The reason the 360 fell apart was because they stopped focusing on exclusives. They focused on service stuff. They did Kinect stuff. Nobody cared about that whatsoever. It's why they lost their foothold. Sony came in and discovered their first party stuff and went on what is continuing to be their best first party run in their entire brand history. It was all about the games. Like, you know, look at the likes of The Last of Us. That massively impacted gaming overall. And how positively received was the Xbox showcase? Like that. I mean, I say that. I think it was pretty good.
God.
Compared to the general, you know, the fact that they showed more in-engine stuff, the fact that they did have a more confident showing than they've had in the past few years. I just think it's all about the games. I think if you have them, that's what leads to the market share.
Well, here's the thing. I do agree with you, but I'm again going to play devil's advocate because you mentioned The Last of Us. Obviously, an iconic game, a hugely influential game, a high-selling game.
Yes.
But that came out in the final year, right at the very end of the PS3 life cycle. And Sony obviously got better. They managed to right the ship. They did focus on those exclusives that you mentioned, you know, introducing the likes of Uncharted and a bunch of others, doubling down on the likes of Gran Turismo and whatnot to get those sales higher. But it's not like they didn't have any missteps either. You talked there about Microsoft focusing on the Kinect. Sony was focusing on the Move controllers, which were worse than the Kinect, in my opinion. And it's like they both kind of... It's not like they completely switched. It's not like Microsoft in that era completely fell off, in my opinion, and Sony just completely nailed it. Like, there was certainly a switch over, but I don't think it's quite as cut and dry as Microsoft stopped focusing on exclusives and Sony started, and that's why they got back on top, in my opinion. But that said, I do think you're absolutely right that this defeatist approach is because they don't have the games right now and don't seem to want to make the games that sell consoles and get people swayed over to Xbox. Because for as much as I just kind of was critical of Sony there over the PS4 era, I do think that's why they dominated. If you go back and watch the reveals for the Xbox One and the PS4, a lot of people were just, myself included, were lukewarm on the PS4's announcement because it looked like a fine machine.
I felt like we didn't need it.
But nothing mind-blowing. I remember everyone saying, okay, like Sony's gone, let's see what Microsoft has. And then they obviously crap themselves, kind of like how Sony did in the previous era. But since then, Sony focused a lot on exclusives, made their console the place to be for high-ranked exclusive games, and Microsoft didn't. So I do think they can catch up, and I do think they can have a lot of success. But yeah, I don't know if they'll always be in that second or maybe even third place.
That's my overall point here, is that they have had previous success that is demonstrable success, even if it was only for those few years, and we can look at total console sales and say that they lost overall, only to the tune of a couple of million units, which in this particular context isn't that much. But my overall point is that they have had demonstrable success in the past when they were backed by various games that, quote unquote, everyone wanted to play, like Gears of War. I just never think this industry is that hard. It always seems to be that some company gets to the top, the hubristic stuff kicks in, and whether you're Sony, Microsoft, whoever, you try all sorts of various things that no one's really asking for, and then it ends up resulting in various market shares going left, right, and center. To mention things about now, to return to right now and not focus on the past, the 360 stuff, written up by The Verge, they say that Xbox, this is also according to one of the quotes that Xbox/Microsoft have said, they only have 21% of the current console market, and they had 16% in 2021. Microsoft had said that Sony is still the dominant player in consoles. Xbox's consoles are consistently ranked third of three behind PlayStation and Nintendo in sales. Right now Xbox systems have sold 21 million units between Series X and S versus the Switch and PS5, which have done 36 million each.
Okay.
So they are demonstrably in third place. So them just saying like, look, we've lost the console, well, we can't possibly catch up. I guess so. Another quote in here I think it's from Sarah Bond, but it's all from the same courtroom hearing, is Microsoft saying that Xbox consoles don't even make money. Xbox generates profits through game sales, not console sales. That is because Xbox sells its consoles at a loss, effectively subsidizing gamers' purchases of the hardware in hopes of making up the lost revenue through sales of games and accessories. Now, this isn't that uncommon. This is something that was more in a talking point when the PlayStation 3 launched, mainly because of the whole blue diode thing, and then prioritizing Blu-rays and that as a big selling point, and that console was notably sold at a loss. But that seems to be the norm for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't necessarily know what they're trying to get at with that, because
it's just a tiny little company. They're not even making any money. I just need the deal.
Like, all consoles mostly are sold at a loss, at least in terms of Microsoft and Sony. I'm not entirely familiar with how Nintendo do business, but every single PlayStation has been sold at a loss. Some for longer than others. Like you said, the PS3 was sold at a loss for years. I think the PS4 was only sold at a loss for a matter of months. The PS5 started to make a profit like mid-2021, so it was just over a year. Okay. But like, that profit still isn't high. It's not like they're making bank off the console sales.
Right.
the console business since it started has been to kind of subsidize the software, to subsidize the games. That's where the money is. Selling 20 million copies of Spider-Man, that's where the money is. It isn't selling all of the machines. It's getting that install base there so then you can shift $60, $70 games and then shift all the microtransactions. So Microsoft, of course, they are right. They are selling their machine at a loss. It's just another one of those things where it's like, but that's just the business model. That's not necessarily uncommon.
No, I think I'll throw in here Sony's side here, because the thing is with this entire courtroom hearing, obviously there are various journalists writing things up that are in the courtroom themselves. I think everything from here is fascinating, very, very juicy stuff, various quotes that have come out from the whole instance that's happening. It's all very interesting, but Sony's side, they're just defending in every direction possible. So you've got Jim Ryan saying that if this deal does go through, he wouldn't even play ball when it comes to sharing potential development info on the PlayStation 6. He says he could not run the risk of a company that was owned by a direct competitor having access to that information. He also apparently sent an email back in January, which has now been revealed by Microsoft's attorney Beth Wilkinson, saying that the entire push for the Blizzard Activision acquisition is not an exclusivity play at all. They're thinking bigger than that, and they have the cash to make moves like this. He said, I've spent a fair bit of time with Phil Spencer, the head of Xbox, and Bobby Kotick, the chief of Activision, and I'm pretty sure we'll continue to see Call of Duty on PlayStation for many years. Now, this is after various conversations on the value of exclusives and tying down parts of the market, because Jim Ryan seems to see this whole deal as like a greedy move, an optional move that Xbox don't need, whereas Microsoft's entire way that they're going about it is to pitch themselves as this is the only way forward, because we're losing so much. If you think of the two different sides, if you want to narrativize it a little bit, that seems to be the way that they're approaching it.
It's very funny, I think. It's very funny across the board, because Microsoft is saying we need this $80 billion deal to go through, or we can't possibly succeed or thrive. And you just kind of have to say, well, what about the other $1 billion deals you've been making for the past 5 years? Was Bethesda like nothing to you? Did that mean nothing?
Are we nothing to you?
I know you got Redfall out of it, but come on, you're also getting Starfield. But like I said at the start, I think both sides have been making outrageous claims. The Jim Ryan thing you mentioned there about, oh, well, if this deal comes through, we couldn't possibly give our dev kit to Activision to make games for the PS6. That's just not something we can do. Is nuts, because in the thread that I was reading that attached this article, everyone in the comments were just pointing out the fact that Xbox gave Sony a dev kit of their next-gen console previously early so they can make an MLB game for their machine.
Yeah.
And it's like, why couldn't you do this? These machines are so similar now that, like, the differences are negligible. It's not like when Sony was making the PS3 and the Xbox 360 and they were so different and it felt so secretive. Now, like the components are so similar, they're kind of just like similar to PC architecture as well, that I don't know, it seems like another mad thing to just say and be like, well, this will impact gamers again because we decided it would.
Yeah, Jim Ryan's whole thing here, which it came out a couple of months ago, there was some insider conversation between Jim Ryan and members of Activision, and one of the people who was at that meeting said that Jim Ryan had quite plainly said he just wants to block the deal. He just wants to be as aggressively, this can't possibly happen, as possible. To go even one step further and be like, well, I'm not even going to play with you anymore. It's like a hell of another step if it does go through. The last thing to mention here is that in amongst all the different things being said, is Microsoft saying that they expect the next console generation to start around about 2028. So it seems like overall, in terms of how long this might go on for, or how long Microsoft have to get everything together in terms of the deals that they have, in terms of what the next Xbox looks like, or whether Xbox is a service or an app or whatever it is, they think 2028 is when the next amount of things will happen in regards to the next console cycle. So it's just worth throwing that in. That might be when the PlayStation 6 arrives, and that's just more of a wider talking point. I do think overall that you can have fun with this stuff. I mean, it's ridiculous. You've got big old corporations fighting each other. To me, it's just fun narrativizing it and going down that.
That's the thing that I kind of want to stress. Like, I'm here like defending some of Microsoft's comments, criticizing some, defending some of Sony's, criticizing some.
You might as well.
But that's just on like their pure argument level. When it comes to like the bigger thing of, do I support like a monopolistic move to try and sweep everything up? Obviously not. Like, I want the competition there. I don't want these publishers and IPs to get completely locked down, and I worry about that in the future. We're certainly seeing that over on the film and TV space. But when it comes to like the individual arguments that and the courtroom drama of trying to get this deal through, it's like, it's funny how these companies view themselves and how they want to be viewed and the narratives that they come up with. I do find that stuff like endlessly fascinating to kind of pick apart, especially when you get those lovely tidbits about when the next generation might start, and we're talking about exclusivity deals and what's going to happen with Call of Duty and all that stuff.
There's loads more in here, and that's the thing. All this stuff is unfurling day by day. There's more things in here about how successful cloud gaming hasn't been for Xbox. But it's all just, like I said, it's all, if you narrativize it, it's all down the road of Microsoft painting themselves as someone who's struggling in the console market, never managed to get a foothold in 20 years, just skirt over all the potential success of the 360 overall, just to say that they need this deal to go through and it means everything to them and they need it, versus Sony just saying like, no, you're a big old greedy corporation and this is a whole thing that it's an optional purchase, you don't need this.
Don't, like, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott Tailford, but this to me is like indicative of an entire capitalistic mentality where success is only measured about by being on top and continuing to grow. Like the Xbox Series X and S, if from at least the last time I read, is doing way better than the Xbox One was doing initially. Like it's outselling that. It's making more money. Obviously, Game Pass is doing quite well. They have a bunch of developers like ready to go with games. The showcase was really well received. But like with many publishers and many console makers and other companies, like that success isn't enough unless you're on top. Unless you're like continuing that green graph upwards, it might as well be meaningless to some of these executives.
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, that's the whole thing. If I bring it back to the games, like I think that whole thing, if you talk about the way that the PlayStation Showcase was received versus the way the Xbox Showcase was received, yes, on the Xbox side, maybe people wanted more specific in-game moments, but at least all those trailers were in-engine in terms of the first-party stuff. And there was a lot of momentum coming out of that. Oh my god, Xbox is back. Xbox finally has stuff to show, which is hilarious and iconic and ridiculous because now all this stuff's coming out with them just saying, like, none of that matters. We're in third place. We can't possibly compete with all these CG trailers over here. Obviously, that's not specifically what they're saying, but to me, I always think it's about the game. So that's the thing that generates the momentum, that creates the market share, etc. Maybe you need the console to play the game. I will put a video right here about some specific Xbox 360 multiplayer maps or something about Xbox 360 stuff because it was a damn good time. Check that out. Let us know what you think down in the comments below. I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
Bye.
Bye.